Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette number 139, where we get philosophy and review it on the internet live for, I have no idea whose pleasure, but I'm doing it anyway. So, let's see what we got today here at Phil Papers. Let's see, what did we look at this morning? Forget. Oh yeah, that's right, I was picking random journals. Yeah, because this is all the same stuff that, from the last few days. Okay, so let's try a different strategy. Oh yeah, AI and Society had stuff, but I've done a few of their papers. Let's go find a different journal, and maybe I'll go to the front page of a Phil archive because all of those papers are there. Let's see, most active. Who's the most active in the journal archive? I don't know if I've ever gone to like ethics. Should probably just read something in ethics. I mean, it may just be that, the reason I haven't read anything in ethics is because I write papers are too long to read in this sort of context. Yeah, see, these are all, well, let's see. This looks like these look like reviews because I have the name first on all of these things. But let's see. Pathological moralizing. Is it moral judgment a commitment device? Wait, let's see if that's there, because that looks like it's paper. Oh, maybe. Dr. Duck. So who wants to dance? Stop posting links. Warning. Sorry, Dr. Duck. I apologize. I mean, I've got a Nightbot because you get spam in here. If you got something for me to read, let me know and I can maybe try to get you to post what you want. Or just don't post it with the linky stuff and maybe I can figure it out. Otherwise, I'm going to read this paper unless you got something cooler. All this does look plenty cool to me. What is this? No? Alright. Okie dokie, so this is what we're going to read today. Pathological Moralizing, Is Moral Judgment a Commitment Device by Michael Prinzing. And there's a link to this paper, and if you get here a little later, and you can type !paper in the chat box, and then you can come back to this page and get the paper yourself, or it'll be in the below the video in the show notes. Did I hit save already or no? I don't think I did. Save. Cool. Okie dokie, and we're off. In Breakdown of Moral Judgment, Eric Campbell, ask me any questions you want. I'll try to answer, but this is my first time reading this. In Breakdown of Moral Judgment, Eric Campbell defends a novel argument for moral abolitionism, the view that we should stop thinking and talking about morality. His argument rests not on a conceptual critique, as an error theory would, but on a normative one. Making moral judgments, he argues, tends to produce potentially severe practical pathologies, and moral discourse is characterized by staggeringly deep, widespread, and intransigent hypocrisy and self-delusion. These pathologies, on Campbell's view, are not accidents. They result from the psychological function of moral judgments. Moral judgments, he argues, are commitment strategies that rely on a deflection of attention from the motivations to which they are in fact related. Hence, hypocrisy and self-delusion are natural consequences of the proper functioning of moral judgments. For this reason, Campbell thinks that many people, though not necessarily everyone, would be better off if they stopped thinking and talking about morality. Well, this is an argument I haven't heard before. This is a ethical quietism. I suppose maybe I have not heard anything along these lines before. Just everyone should be quiet and stop being all moral talk like. Okay, ethical quietism, or moral quietism. Campbell is not entirely clear about the kind of disvalue his normative critique appeals to, but often normative criticisms of moral discourse appeal to the prudential disvalue of the discourse, and Campbell seems to take this route. For example, he suggests that moral discourse is an obstacle to human flourishing. However, given that this argument does not depend on an error theory, Campbell could coherently claim that moral discourse is morally bad and that we morally ought to abolish moral discourse. Okay, so it's like self-defeating in that case. So, Campbell's account is an interesting one and there is much to be said for it, but it does not point out, as he claims, a serious unnoticed problem with moral judgments. Instead, it highlights a problem with rule following or deontological judgments, moral or otherwise. Thus, Campbell's argument cannot justify abolishing moral discourse entirely, but only its deontological elements. This more limited conclusion would still be interesting, of course, but it is important to properly locate the argument in dialectical space. Once we do, however, a second problem emerges. This is that, reframed as an argument for deontological abolitionism, the normative critique can play only a limited dialectical role. Okay, so that's interesting. So they're going to limit this quietism to basically a deontological issue. So I don't know what the limits of deontology are, though, so we'll have to find out what they have to say. So deontology quietism. Campbell's account of moral judgments. First, I'll provide a quick summary of the relevant points from Campbell's article. He begins by noting that human tendency to engage in future discounting, choosing smaller, sooner goods over larger, later goods. This tendency leads people to change many of their preferences as a function of time, then change them again in retrospect. When we are deliberating in cool moments, we judge larger, later goods to be better. But when the time comes, we tend to choose a smaller good sooner. Yes, we go for the shiny and the flashy. After the fact, we wish we had stuck with the initial choice. Consider someone who wants to get into shape. After reading about the immense benefits of a healthy lifestyle, he decides that he ought to eat right and exercise. Ha! But each time he sees a tray of donuts, he thinks, just one won't hurt. Yet after it's eaten, he wishes he had abstained. Because of the way that humans are psychologically constituted, in the moment decision-making tends to favor smaller, sooner goods, which are much more salient than the larger, later ones. Yes, the shiny and the flashy. We tend, therefore, to choose contrary to what we, in some sense, really value, and we are quite good at finding excuses for doing so. It is often advantageous, therefore, to commit ourselves to certain courses of action. Commitments, in Campbell's sense, are reductions in flexibility of choice. One commitment, I would go with restrictions of flexibility of choice, not really reductions. It's a restriction on it. Don't know what it's a different reduction tends to get overused otherwise. One commitment strategy is to make the tempting option inaccessible, for example, by avoiding places where there are donuts. If one cannot actually eliminate a tempting option, another way of restricting one's choice is to make the option less subjectively accessible, that is, less psychologically salient. I mean, I think they're going to have some more Krispy Kreme places here in New York. That would be so nice. Oh my god. Yeah. We really don't have very many. Like, I think they're going to open like some flagship store. Well, I have no idea if anything is going to happen anymore, given the state of the world at the moment. But they were going to open some like flagship Krispy Kreme store. That was going to be so cool. Okay, if one cannot actually eliminate a tempting option, another way of restricting one's choices to make the option less subjectively accessible, that is, less psychologically salient. For instance, if donuts are present, one might try to focus on something else. Another strategy is to rearrange the incentives. I was just thinking about this the other day. There's a clip of Joe Rogan, and not to hammer on Joe Rogan, but he has some very pretty women in front of him doing stuff, and he's just like staring up at the ceiling and doing all these sorts of things just to avoid looking at the pretty women. But it's just a very funny clip. But yeah, you can try to do something to make it, to just sort of get it out of your head. Another is rearrange the incentive. Another strategy is to rearrange the incentives. One might give a friend $50 and instruct her not to return it if one eats any donuts. If recruiting others is a problem, it is possible to manipulate one's perceptions of the incentives. For instance, as Campbell discusses, one can make options look less appealing by seeing them as symbols for classes of options or as indicatives of one's character. For instance, if one can get oneself to see the decision whether to eat this donut as the decision whether to be overweight, or if eating it will mean seeing oneself as a glutton, one is much less likely to eat it. The basic picture is that commitments help us stick to a long-term strategy by either making tempting options less tempting or simply removing them from consideration altogether. Enter moral judgments. According to Campbell, the psychological function of moral judgments is to help us act in pro-social and personally advantageous ways. Legal and social sanctions can change our incentives by adding penalties to antisocial actions and rewards to pro-social ones, but it is often possible to evade these sanctions. Knowing this, we are still likely to face temptations in many decisions. Moral judgments, Campbell argue, constitute a commitment strategy that precludes case-by-case decision-making about antisocial actions by making certain options subjectively unavailable. So instead of having some sort of external reason for not doing something like a legal and social sanction reason, the moral ones are just sanctions in your own head. So it's something that you're carrying with you, that as opposed to like you can escape the legal sanctions if like you're avoid getting caught, but you can't escape your own morals that are stuck in your mind. Okay. Take lying as an example. They say that honesty is the best policy. They say that honesty is the best policy, and generally they are right. Consistent truthfulness typically produces a reputation for trustworthiness, which enables trusting relationships that can be immensely valuable. And according, of course, to Captain Jack Sparrow, when you get to lie, then it's no one expects it, and you get away with it really well. Okay, reputation for trustworthiness, which enables trusting relationships that can be immensely valuable. It also usually leads to opportunities for cooperation and other social benefits, but lying has many small short-term benefits. Given our tendency to discount the value of future goods, the immediate benefits of lying will receive undue weight in case-by-case decision-making. This means that, in the absence of a commitment, people will probably end up lying fairly often, spoiling their reputations and preventing them from reaping the benefits of honesty. It is advantageous, therefore, to commit oneself to truthfulness. Campbell's view is that the moral judgment, lying is wrong, helps one to remain truthful by keeping one from ever even entertaining lying as a live option in the first place. When one judges that lying would be wrong, one takes lying off the deliberative table. So, like, if you post evil links in my chat, that is a short-term goal, but you should not be spamming. That would be a moral imperative. And so, not to hammer on Dr. Duck, who I doubt was actually spamming, because they're actually in the chat, but that's sort of the modern incarnation of this. It costs you very little in the short term, and you might get lucky with your lies and your spam, but you lose your reputation and other social goods overall with it. I'm sorry, Dr. Duck. Moral language, as Campbell puts it, moral language straightforwardly suggests a style of thinking in which options are being closed off, that is, their availability is being subjectively removed. For example, I can't keep the money, it's wrong. The idea that one must not do something, or that one has a moral duty not to, or that something is impermissible, morally required, or even unthinkable, clearly suggests not a weighing of options, but rather taking some of them off the table. This precludes case-by-case evaluation of the action and thereby the threat of weakening of the will by means of rationalization of particular cases. Moral judgment is able to take an option off the table but making the decision feel like it is not, in some sense, up to the deliberator. Moral requirements feel motivation independent. This is because, on Campbell's view, they work by deflecting attention away from our motivations to secure larger, later goods and onto a realm which is apparently independent of those motivations. For example, divine command or moral laws. Officially, again, he is agnostic about whether there is any such realm. Moral judgments work, in other words, by a cognitive sleight of hand. They replace in our decision-making our real motivations and concerns with the demands of some perceived external authority. Before continuing, let's consider more carefully how this is supposed to go. There are different ways in which an option could be prevented from getting onto the deliberative table. First, though Campbell doesn't discuss this, it could never occur to the deliberator at all. We might think that the prospect of lying simply wouldn't occur to someone who is truly committed to honesty. Yet we are often aware of options that we judge to be immoral. It's only then, after all, that we could form moral judgments that might keep us from behaving in certain ways. For example, it would be wrong to do that. In such cases, the option could only be kept out of deliberation by being rejected without consideration. This could happen because the incentives are perceived to be so obviously bad that the option isn't worth entertaining. For instance, I might make a mess and everyone sees me do it. It would be foolish to claim that the dog made it. An attempt at deception would clearly backfire. Moral judgments might work similarly. For instance, many believe that lying is wrong because it is prohibited by an ever-watchful God. Some such person might even believe that she will be eternally punished for lying. No worldly benefit could outweigh those costs. Secular moral judgments might do something similar by lumping actions together under a description and encouraging us to think in terms of those categories rather than individual choices. If I can get myself to see the decision whether to lie as the decision whether to be a liar, then the incentives will appear very different. And you get like essentialist, like your character is like essentially damaged. You're a liar now. A related virtue with theoretic strategy would be to think about the kind of person one wants to be, what that person would do, and what kind of person one's choices shape one into. So you'd be playing into your vices. You'd be instead of a virtuous person, you'd be a licentious, vicious person. I mean, there's the old quote, of course, there's no virtue without any vice. So, maybe you want some vice. Anywho, according to Campbell, however, the primary function of moral judgments is not to make options seem unappealing, even so clearly unappealing to not be worth taking seriously, but to make them seem unavailable. His view is that moral convictions are prisons by design. Their main point is to limit, prevent a sense of freedom with respect to actions falling under certain descriptions or categorizations. So what are we going? Not just sin, but like mortal sin? I don't know. Yeah, because you've got like I don't know Christian theology, but you definitely have different levels of sin. I mean, go straight to hell. No pass go. Just as a prisoner might long to run free, a moralizer might long to lie. Neither does. But this is not because they see these options as bad deals. Rather, it's because they don't see them as real possibilities at all. Yeah, well, we'll have to see where they're going with this. As the prison metaphor suggests, Campbell sees serious downsides to moral judgments in addition to their benefits. In order to serve their committing function, moral judgments must not be recognized as playing this role. Since the removing or limiting of options is subjective, that is, not a result of changes in one's actual abilities, one is aware of the strategy. Many unthinkable things may become thinkable, and once thinkable can be difficult to unthink in important cases. Well, once it's in your head, you can't get it out, I guess is the point. In other words, becoming aware that one has only ruled out lying so that one won't be tempted to rationalize particular lies enables one to do exactly that, to deem this particular lie acceptable. Of course, this same rationale will be available in every case, and so the commitment strategy will have failed. The strategy can only work if our attention is deflected away from what we really value and towards some external law or authority. This means, well, not really value, short-term value. This means that we will think we are acting on our moral principles for the sake of principles, but the real reason will be to secure the larger later goods. The result is a systematic lack of awareness of one's underlying motivations. Maybe. Okay, so I see kind of what the setup is here. They're trying to make it like, well, if you're locking yourself out of doing the silly thing for the long-term goal, then you've got this sort of very strange sort of impermissibility that's going on here. Right, let's see what they want to do with it, though. What this means is that precisely because moral judgments work in the way described, they lead to things like hypocrisy and self-delusion. Not only can we feel that much is at stake in decisions of intrinsically little importance, but we can be led to do what is radically against our long-term preferences and values in decisions of great intrinsic importance. You're deluding yourself according to some laws. Okay, Campbell cites Kant as a severely pathological moralizer. Kant infamously thought that lying is always wrong. If one stuck to such Procrustean policy, one would end up doing terrible things in the name of morality. Lying, for example, to the axe murderer at the door, is sometimes exactly what one ought to do. Campbell's worry is that moralizing encourages us to focus on rules rather than the things whose values could justify those rules. This means that we are likely to end up following rules that don't actually serve our interests, or rigidly adhering to general good rules even in exceptional cases where we should violate them. If Campbell's account is right, then these consequences of moral discourse are not accidents, they are necessary side effects of moral thought. While Campbell does not pretend to have given an exhaustive cost-benefit analysis of moral discourse, he does suggest that many people are now at a point where the costs of making moral judgments outweigh the benefits. Desisting from moral judgments would enable them to gain normatively important forms of self-knowledge and more effectively pursue what they really value. So I guess what these people are saying is that people are using these ethical systems as basically a crutch. And so they're relying on these things when as Campbell might want them to do, is learn something more about gain normatively important forms of self-knowledge. By relying on the rules all the time, they are losing out because they don't really understand what's going on. They're just sort of blindly following the rules. And blindly following the rules is a form of like self-imprisonment, like blinders. You don't know which way you're going. Okay, so let's see what the authors then have to say. Of course, keep in mind also that this is the author's account. They have set this up so that the person with morals has the blinders is the metaphor they want you to be thinking about. Like, they brought up the prison analogy. Which kind of judgments? I will now provide my response. Campbell's account is only plausible as a description of a limited class of moral judgments. The psychological function he describes could well be served by one kind of moral judgments, but not by all of them. There are, as reflective moralizers have long known and moral psychologists have now extensively studied, different modes or styles of moral reasoning. Sometimes moral reasoning involves weighing the pros and cons of different options in order to form a judgment about what to do. For example, if I steal this loaf of bread, then I harm the baker. But my family will starve if I don't, which is even worse, so I'll steal it. I'll call this calculating style of reasoning consequentialist. Ooh, very clever name there. Sorry about that. Other times, moral reasoning takes the form of applying rules to particular cases. For example, stealing is wrong. Taking this loaf of bread would constitute stealing, so I won't steal it. I'll call this rule-following style of reasoning deontological. Where do you come up with these names? They're like so clever. I again apologize. Campbell's account of moral judgment seems to describe deontological but not consequentialist judgment. To reiterate, the problem is that Campbell claims moral judgments are supposed to solve our tendency, resulting from future discounting, to make bad in-the-moment decisions. If we let ourselves consider the option of lying, for instance, then we'll lie fairly often. That is to say, consequentialist calculating often leads to screw-ups. So we need a way of controlling which option to enter into those calculations in the first place. The way to do this is introduce another kind of reasoning that doesn't involve considering the merits of the options, but instead rules certain options in or out of consideration. We need judgments that will limit or prevent a sense of freedom with respect to actions falling under certain descriptions or categorizations, which is what Campbell claims moral judgments do. This function is plausibly served by rule-following deontological judgments. Lying is categorically impermissible, seems to make lying seem not just unappealing but unavailable. If one thinks that lying is simply forbidden, then one won't even consider the demerits of lying in particular cases. Okay, I don't agree with this for a reason I'm going to tell you right now. Consequentialist calculating. And so we need a way of... let's see, that was over-highlighting. We need a way of controlling what options enter those calculations in the first place. I think it's becoming more painfully obvious nowadays with the rise of social media, Google, and all the giant search engines and the media companies and the information age we are currently in now, that it's not just calculating, but it's how you set up your algorithms and all that sort of stuff makes a terribly important, make very, very significant difference in what sort of results you get. Like, you can read books. I read one of these books on, what was it called? Can't remember it now. It's too bad because it was a good book. But, just how the Google search page basically ranks things. The page rank algorithm makes a very big difference in how the outcome of people view the search results. Because people, this is not just in search results, we make a very big difference between the first few results and the ones further down the page. And that has nothing to do with Google. We were always like that. But a lot of times the like 10th option is really not that far away from the first option, but once things are ranked, we give much more weight to the ones at the very top, even if the ones slightly lower down are really not any different. So it's not that this is not in any way, shape, or form innocent. So the way we make the calculations, and so this calculation here, let's see this one. It's not just what we enter into the calculations, but the calculations are not innocent either. And so, at this point, I fear I may diverge from the authors, because the way you set up calculations is a big deal. And it's not just the category, it's that the calculations themselves, which ones you pick, make a big difference. Okay, so sorry for the small rant, but it's a growing problem in sort of like current ethics. Donated $10. I love your interpretation. Well, I can't believe that you actually gave me some money for this. I thank you so much. I have no idea how I can even accept that money. So, I mean, please just go donate the money someplace good, like Doctors Without Borders or something, because I don't even know if I can get the money out of Twitch. But thank you so much for your generosity there. Yeah. Cheers, Rodolfo. Okay, moving on though, and also this is my first donation. I'm rather surprised and thankful. Thank you very much. But consequentialist calculating is a genuine form of moral reasoning. Oh, exclamation point. Maybe this author's way ahead of me. Okay, and now I don't believe any of this, but again, thank you so much, whatever the 300 is. Maybe it's 300 pennies and $3. I love you is beautiful. Okay, that's so cool. I have no idea what's going on, and I apologize for not understanding, but I thank you both for at least putting that in my chat. Okay, so that's cool. And like I said, go donate to like someone that, like Doctors Without Borders or something sort of important. I'd prefer that at the moment. But thank you. Now I'm just more confused than anything. But thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, João Pedro and Rodolfo. But consequential calculating is a form of moral reasoning. Consider act consequentialist judgments like, I should not lie in this case because it would secure suboptimal results. Then you shouldn't, see, I don't know if you'd even call it a lie. You just be like, I shouldn't go with that outcome because it would secure suboptimal results. Okay, bye, Rodolfo, thank you. I don't know what I don't know what this 1,000 is. But it looks cool, and thank you again. So if you're going to donate stuff, again, please save your money or give it someplace, some charity that's more worthwhile than me. Appreciate it, though. I don't know what those numbers mean. These judgments cannot forestall case-by-case deliberation because they already are case-specific decisions. Hence, act consequentialist moral judgments are precisely the kind of thoughts that, on Campbell's view, moral judgments are supposed to preclude. Whatever you think of the truth, act consequentialist judgments like these, as well as the risks Campbell's argues they bring, they are genuinely moral judgments. Yes, but what is the... These judgments cannot forestall case-by-case deliberation because they're already case-specific decisions. Okay, sure. Alright, I donate to you, and we got Eat Girls as a, thing. Alright, interesting. Alright. This shows that performing the function... This shows that performing the function Campbell describes is not a necessary condition for being a moral judgment. He recognizes himself that it is not a sufficient condition. He thinks that his account will encompass a range of non-moral, for example, prudential, judgments as well. Hence the class of judgment Campbell describes, and to which his criticism applies, overlap with, but is not identical to, moral judgments. Yeah, okay, let's keep going. Thus, the purported negative effects of moral discourse are not necessarily byproducts as Campbell claims. It may be that, as we concurrently conduct it, moral discourse doesn't lead to the pathologies he mentions, but there is no reason why this must be so. We could avoid the problems by abstaining from deontological reasoning. Now, abolishing this part of moral discourse would certainly be a major revolution in moral life, but it is not the same as abolishing moral discourse entirely. Critiques of rule-following judgments, after all, are not new. When Joshua Green, for instance, criticized characteristically deontological judgments as reflections of our automatic emotional responses, or when Cass Sunstein suggested that many of our moral rules are imperfect moral heuristics, nobody understood these arguments for abolishing moral discourse. If we, as arguments for abolishing moral discourse. If we accept Campbell's critique of deontological reasoning, one sensible response would be to shift to a purely consequentialist moral discourse. This option, known as reforming consequentialism, has been around for decades. Another possibility would be to adopt a virtue-theoretic moral discourse. This, again, is not a new idea. I conclude that, at best, Campbell has shown that we should make major changes to moral discourse, not that we shouldn't think or talk about morality at all. Well, to be fair to Campbell, I mean, usually all these things are not so absolutist that you can't talk about it at all. It's just that you have to cut way down. So, I mean, even if I understand where this author is coming from, and it mostly makes sense. So, like, my criticisms notwithstanding. So it's like, is this even if we accept the author here's conclusion, I mean, it would still be a pretty significant thing Campbell did. But I guess what we're gonna do is the author will just go into what this actually entails now. So that's cool. This raises a second problem. If we reformulate Campbell's arguments as an argument for deontological abolitionism, it becomes very dialectically limited. As we've seen, according to Campbell, the problem with the discourse is that it prevents us from acquiring normatively important forms of self-knowledge. He's not especially clear on why this is a problem, and there are a few ways of cashing out the objection. But whatever way we go, the argument is seriously dialectically limited. Okay, let's see. One might argue that self-ignorance is bad because it impedes one's flourishing. This claim could be spelled out in consequentialist terms. For example, self-ignorance has the bad consequence of impairing one's ability to pursue the things that one really values, or it could be spelled out in virtue-theoretic terms. For example, self-ignorance is bad because it is a vice. This version of the objection may be persuasive for those who, for whatever reason, consider deontological reasoning to be justified on consequentialist or virtue-theoretic grounds. But it will be totally uncompelling for sincere deontologists who think that we should engage in deontological reasoning because there are moral laws. Recall that Campbell makes no claims as to the truth of moral judgments. The claim is that, regardless of their truth, we shouldn't form deontological judgments. But if the argument for this conclusion turns on consequentialist or virtue-theoretic considerations, then it ignores precisely what matters to sincere deontologists. To get around this problem, Campbell could cash out his self-knowledge objection in deontological terms. Self-delusion, he could say, is not merely bad, but contrary to our duty to not be self-deluded. Perhaps this is a duty we owe to ourselves. So we are duty-bound not to think or talk about duty. Even this argument, though, will only work for a subset of deontologists. Some, notably Kant, think that compliance with one's duty requires acting for duty's sake. If one tells the truth because one fears punishment, one is acting in accord with duty but has not acted rightly. Deontologists of this stripe will think that abolishing deontological discourse necessarily keeps us from doing our duty because it would mean that we never act with the right motivation. This would be a very powerful reason not to abolish deontological discourse, regardless of its harmful consequences. On the other hand, deontologists who don't think that a dutiful motivation is necessary for acting rightly will at least be open to deontological argument for abolishing deontological discourse. But even if a dutiful motivation isn't necessary for acting in accordance with duty, it does seem very unlikely that people will coincidentally end up doing their duty without ever thinking about it. It may be that somehow by pursuing non-duty things they really value, people end up acting as duty requires. But Campbell doesn't argue for this, and it's not very plausible. Yeah, I'm still going back to my objection, though. I don't see why Campbell couldn't reformulate a consequentialist or virtue-theoretic version of this argument. Perhaps Campbell did not, and this author is correct for pointing it out. But I mean, I'm thinking there might be a way to do that. Like, why wouldn't there be a virtue saying that know thyself is a virtue, and then, self-ignorance is bad because it is a vice, and so... I mean, this right here, as the author said, like, this is right. So it seems like Campbell maybe did a this author's biggest complaint is that Campbell did not do a good enough job in doing a full job explaining what the position was. Okay, conclusion. Campbell offers a fascinating criticism of moral discourse. His argument is all the more interesting because it sidesteps long-standing debates surrounding error theory. But even spotting his main claims, the argument does not support moral abolitionism. At most, it supports deontological abolitionism. Thus, we could respond by becoming reformed consequentialists or virtue theorists. Doing so would certainly involve major changes to the way we think and talk about morality, but this is far less radical than quitting moral discourse altogether, as abolitionists recommend. Okay, cool paper. Yeah, so as the author says, like right over here, there's probably ways around, there's ways out for Campbell. Campbell could defend the, I guess that would be a his, so is it his or not? Eric, yeah, probably a his. So we'll go with his for now. There's probably a way that Campbell could bolster his account to include the other main ethical traditions and maybe even some others. Because of course there's plenty of other traditions that like you go to some, like, I don't know, Confucian tradition. I'm sure they do things slightly differently. I don't even know, but I doubt that our Western glosses would cover that sort of theory. So there's probably ways to reformulate the argument here, in that case. Now the question then becomes, where exactly, like, does Campbell really, what would Campbell have to do to really make more of a general account? And that would be interesting. Is like I was saying up here, that what might have to happen is there'd have to be some more general understanding of ethics entirely. And that, I agree that the authors here, whoever they are, I don't remember, this folks, Michael Prinzing, has rightly called Campbell out for not doing a good enough job. It's too, either Campbell has not given a full enough argument, or just just has not given a full enough argument for the claims made. So for that, this is a nice article, straightforward, shows that at best it does a good job in the deontological realm, even if it doesn't cover everything else. So maybe it has potential still, but yeah, that's basically it. I don't have a whole lot more to say. It was just a little bit of fun, short paper. Even by my standards, I mean less than 10. So, if anyone else has any comments or questions, please let me know, or else that'll be it for now. Please, again, donate money to somebody else. I mean, I could use the cash, but other people, I mean, if you're going to donate stuff, you might as well give it to somebody else. Yeah. And I don't know what that is, actually. I'd have to find out what happened right here. But, yeah. Hope everyone has a good day and stay safe, y'all. I'll be back tomorrow, I guess. Have a good night. Bye-bye.